Great. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Today, I will be giving you guys a talk about narrative design. I'm trying to aim for the talk to be like 30, 45 minutes long, more or less. If it takes longer, cool. If it doesn't, that's also fine. If you guys have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat, but we will also have a section at the end for the questions. I will also give you guys a small exercise in the middle of the talk, just so that we can keep it a bit exciting. All right. So who exactly am I? I'm a program manager at Saudi Game Champions. I'm the organizer and founder of the Gaming Academy. I'm part of the International Game Developers Association as well. I've done Arabic game stuff. I've done a lot of narrative design. I've done a lot of game development. I've done over 20 projects by myself and supported over 50 as well. And I was part of the future class of the Game Awards in 2023. These are some of the places that I've worked and some of the things that I've helped with in one way or another, either as a volunteer or like as a professional. All right. So when we start thinking of narrative design, one of the most important things to think about when it comes to, games and narrative is game design. So there are a few things that you should keep in mind. The first one is how exactly should you think of a game? So a game is a very interactive piece of software, or it can be hardware, depending on whether you're making a board game or a card game or a video game. All right, you have to think of it as something that you can interact with and something that when you do a certain thing, something will happen. So if you keep on jumping, you're gonna jump. If you're gonna walk, you're gonna walk. A movie cannot move around unless you decide to fast forward, pause, or stop it. A book cannot, you can skip around in a book as well, but the words on page 247 will always be the same words on page 247. Whereas with a game, whenever you're actually playing around with it, you're going to be interacting with a lot of things that are happening there. So it's very important to keep this in mind whenever you are designing a game. Well, obviously, this is going to translate as well into narrative design, and we will discuss how in a second. The second thing you should ask is what exactly are you trying to design? There's a very big difference between designing a game that is a roguelike versus a card game versus a card game roguelike versus, for example, a simulation game versus a narrative based point and click game, etc., etc. So knowing what it is you are trying to design is going to change the way that you approach your game. All right, you're not going to look at it in just one shape. You're going to look at it from all different angles to know exactly what it is you want to go for. So, for example, if you decided to make a game like a building sim, then you're going to need to give the inventory system, for example, a much bigger look than if you are doing it in I don't know, a hack and slash game, for example. The next question you should ask yourself when designing your games is what exactly do you care about? Is there a message you want to get to people? Is there something specific that you are working towards? Um, is there any interest specifically in just making something fun? Do you want to make people laugh? Do you want to make people cry? Do you want to get them scared? What is it that your game is designing? These are also super, super important questions to answer. The next thing you should look at is what exactly are you good at? So some of you have set up your teams. Congratulations if you have. Not congratulations if you haven't. You still have a bit of time to form your own teams and start working on your games. And each of you is going to be good at something. All right. If you are good at creating stories, it's going to be very different than coding, which is also going to be very different from art, from music, etc., etc. So, what is it that you are good at? And is your team lacking anyone specific? For example, if I were to work on a game as a solo dev, my art and my music would not be the best. So, I might rely on assets, I might rely on paying people like as freelancers to do some things for me. Or I might decide not to make a game that relies heavily on art. So there's a game called Thomas Was Alone. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but if you look it up, you're gonna see that it's all the characters are basically squares or rectangles. And you form an emotional connection with them because the creator of the game was a decent programmer. He was a good narrative designer or storyteller, and he was a good puzzle maker. So the game was able to do very well, even though it was literally just a few rectangles here and there. How experienced are you is also another question you guys should ask. So generally, when you guys are um, basically making something new, I remember the first time I made a game, it took me 48 hours to get a character to move. Now I can get this up and running in around 30 minutes. So depending on your level of experience, you're going to want to do different things. At one point in time, in one of the classes I was teaching, someone decided to take all of this information and translate it into what they did best. As kids, he or her sister, they used to create games on PowerPoint. It was basically choose your own adventure kind of games. So that's what they did. And this was for a university class. What they ended up doing is creating a game out of PowerPoint and buttons. So each button was a certain picture, and this led you on different paths. And depending on which paths you took and which buttons you clicked, you ended up having certain items which allowed you to actually either finish the game or lose. So, because of their experience in doing a bit of writing, because of their experience in doing a bit of work with PowerPoint, basically, they ended up making a game that way. Someone else that I know worked on a board game, for example, because she was very good at drawing, she was a very good artist, um, and she had like a decent idea for like game balance, you know? So instead of doing something with art, sorry, with code and programming it, she decided to do a hardware, well, not hardware, like a non-software game, basically. So whenever you guys are designing your games, it's very important to know what it is you are building, what you are good at, and what you will be able to finish, especially in the amount of time you have. Sometimes it's totally fine to use a project just to learn a certain task or a certain goal or a certain something. All right. There were a lot of games where, the 20 games I mentioned, for example, I used some of these games as ways to learn more about designing certain types of genres and certain types of games. For example, I made a couch co-op racing game at some point because I wanted to learn how to create drift inside games and how fun it would be to get two people to play together on the same computer. I created a third-person shooter game at some point. It was like a top-down third-person shooter because, again, I wanted to see what kind of third-person shooter game I could make and what kind of ideas would come up and what kind of challenges would come up. So as you get better and better, you're gonna change what kind of experience you have in game design and what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. Does this make sense? Are we good on game design? Did we build a decent base on what kind of thing you should think about? Can I have a yes, a thumbs up, something? Or are you guys
Yes.
on? Tamam. Cool. Awesome. Great, great, great. Glad that you guys are still focused. All right. So, whenever you guys are thinking of game design, once again, you're going to think about what the creation process is for the game. The most important thing you should do, and we've mentioned this before, is creating the core mechanic. Once you're done with building the core mechanic, you can start to build out the rest of the game through secondary mechanics, progression, and the narrative to a certain extent. And as you can see, the narrative is in the biggest loop. It's not anywhere in the nearest, it's not nearer to the center in any way, shape, or form because the narrative is generally, when it comes to game development, the easiest thing to change and the easiest thing to set in a different way. So, for example, if you look at a game like, the multiplayer version of Call of Duty, if you look at, what's it called, League of Legends, for example, even like a lot of the single player games like Binding of Isaac, for example, or I don't know, like there are a few others you can think of. They generally look at the game mechanics and how fun the game is, and accordingly, people will decide to play this game or not. Because if you have the most amazing story, but the clunkiest controls, then no one will ever take a look at the game. So it's very important that you build out the mechanics first, and then once this is done and it is completed naturally, you'll be able to build things in another way. All right? Okay, I can see you guys mentioned Isaac. Cool. All right. Other things to mention as well is it's very, very important to note that the core mechanic is usually a single thing that you will do almost forever when it comes to the game. All right. So, for example, if we think of Minecraft, one of the core mechanics in Minecraft is building. I mean, it's mining and crafting. That's how the game works. All right. So, you're always looking at blocks, you're always building them, you're always setting them up in certain ways. And accordingly, you will interact with the game in certain ways. All right. If you look at Mario with the GIF at the bottom, or GIF, depending on whether you want to say it right or wrong, you will notice that Mario is jumping. And that is because if you look at what Mario's general functions are in most of his games, he's usually just jumping around. Whether he's jumping to hit blocks above him, whether he's jumping to grab onto something else, whether he's throwing his hat and jumping on it so that he can get to higher areas, the core mechanic of most, if not all, Mario games is jumping. All right? What would be the core mechanic, for example, of since we're talking about Mario, what's the core mechanic in Mario Kart? What do you guys think? It's a very simple answer, so it shouldn't be too hard.
Driving.
Driving, well done. What would be the core mechanic in um let's see. The core mechanic in uh Call of Duty Zombies, for example. Shooting, well done, exactly. So the main and most important thing is the shooting. You want to make sure the recoil feels good, the reload feels good. You want to make sure that the core thing that the player is doing most of the time, which is running around and shooting, feels as good as possible. All right? Some games are able to get away with it in one way or another. For example, there was this game where you play as a dinosaur with a giant sword. The game itself feels a bit clunky to play, but because of the way they built the animations and fluffed up the actual attacks, people are like, "Oh yeah, good game. It's fine. It's great. It's what I want, you know?" And if we want to look into mobile games, for example, if you look at Pocket, what's it called? Pokemon TCG, for example, like all you do is open packs, but they make opening packs feel very satisfying. They make collecting cards feel very satisfying. There are different things that you can do with the game, but generally they're less important, let's say. If you look at a game like what's it called? Flappy Bird, for example. In Flappy Bird, generally what you're going to be doing is tapping on the screen, and then the bird just jumps up and moves forward. And this in itself is the main core of the game's design. All right? So as soon as you build a game with a good core and a good core mechanic, you will be able to build something awesome. All right? If you build a game with a bad core but an excellent story, no one's going to play the game enough to actually listen to you set up the story. Does this make sense to everyone? Yeah, it's very important that before we start talking about narrative, you guys have an idea about the importance of game design. Perfect. طيب, so what exactly is the difference between a narrative designer and a storyteller? A storyteller is someone that usually helps move the story of the game forward. All right? When you are a designer, though, you need to make sure that the player does this and actually has fun while this happens. All right? Because again, if all you are doing is playing the game, and there's an amazing story, but the game itself doesn't feel good or the world itself isn't being built well, then no one's gonna actually listen to your story. All right? And the thing is, the story is the cheapest part of the game, unfortunately. It's very easy to write a story and then suddenly erase everything and then change up the way that it works. All right? If you've ever seen like reskinned games, especially like those mobile games with like merge match or whatever, they generally have the same core mechanic, which is swiping things and collecting things together. But what they're generally changing is who you're saving or what you're doing. This is the storyteller part. The narrative designer part in all these games is generally the for example, let's take merge mansion. I haven't played the game myself, but you're merging stuff that are inside a mansion, for example. Another one would be like one where you have like cakes or whatever, like you're building cakes, مش building, you're cooking cakes. So what you end up doing is merging cake items instead. So a narrative designer will decide what kind of ingredients you're going to need for the cake versus what kind of household items you're going to need to rebuild the mansion. So this, I would say, is the main difference between a game like narrative designer and a storyteller. Now, if we want to move away a bit from mobile games and go into PC games, for example, we can look at Elden Ring. I don't know how many of you guys have played it, but basically in Elden Ring, most of what you'll be doing is bonking things and getting bonked and just hitting things and getting hit. But as soon as you enter the tutorial area, what happens is you get thrown into a dark cave to a certain extent. You're gonna have one way to move forward. You're gonna see the enemies in front of you very clearly, and it's kind of hard for you to get lost. However, if you look at the previous versions of Elden Ring, they actually changed the tutorial area quite a bit because people weren't sure which way to go, and some people were missing parts of it, basically. Once you're done with the tutorial area, you're going to get to a door, and as soon as you open it, you will see a giant tree in front of you. This giant tree is basically acting as a waypoint and asking you to go there. So as you go there, you'll start following paths, you'll encounter the same things as everyone else. which is why whenever someone starts the game, they generally encounter this giant horse thing that ends up absolutely crushing them. Because this is also something that the game teaches you through narrative design. If you have not played Elden Ring, then this might not mean much to you, but I highly recommend you go and look at the end of the tutorial and the way that you enter the world, because this will give you a general idea about how a narrative designer would help with actually building the world in the game. Milo's asking, so the story should be integrated in almost every aspect of the game, and that is what narrative design is? No, no, no. It's not the story that needs to be integrated. It's that everything in the game needs to make sense in its placement. So, for example, you would not put a toilet inside the kitchen unless you're playing a game like The Sims. Then that would make sense. But as a narrative designer, you will need to, for example, um, let's say you are building a house where a family lives versus a house where a single person who's like a crazy cat lady lives. You're going to build two completely different houses in terms of the rooms, in terms of their priorities, in terms of the way that they put the stuff all over. And this is how you will tell your story. Because generally, people are not going to listen to something uh, in like a formal way. They're going to want to piece the story together by checking out what is around you and what is happening. So for example, in Skyrim, when you enter, there's this one place, like you go and talk to a guy, I forgot what his name was, but his like title is something the Blind, and he has a notebook. And so if you decide to read his notebook, you'll find out that it's empty because he's blind. So obviously it's going to be empty. But you look at it and you're like, "Oh, okay, whatever. That was annoying." But that's literally the point. So that is what narrative design is to a certain extent. So like what you build based on context, yes, I would say that you want to build based on context. So if you are trying to build a game that is a horror game, the narrative designer will help build the world in a way that makes sense for narrative designers. Sorry, for a horror game. So you're not gonna have like bright flowers. You're not gonna have the sun shining. You're not gonna have easy enemies to kill. You're gonna have like really tough things. You're gonna have like tight corridors and tight spaces. You're gonna have lamps that turn off and on. You're gonna hear weird voices here and there. And all of this stuff is things that the narrative designer would recommend or would suggest. And then the game designer will see if it can be implemented. The programmer will actually do the coding, and the artist will be the one that's creating all the art that is needed. So, to summarize all of this, other than the table that you can see on the side, the narrative designer is the one that is focused on making sure that the world makes sense with or without any words inside it, whereas the writer is the one that tells you to a certain extent how the story is going to progress in a more linear fashion. All right? I hope this kind of makes sense. Cool. So, some of the things that you guys are going to ask yourselves as well. We have a question. Ahmed is asking, um, the world period or just like the world setting? Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by this question, Ahmed. Um, but basically, narrative design should, okay, so a narrative designer is going to make sure that if the game is based in a house, so for example, if you look at unpacking, unpacking is a game where you generally just see the inside of the house and you see this one person move different houses, and every time you move into a new house, you're going to unpack the stuff and decide where you want to put all of her things, whether it's in the bathroom, the bedroom, the kitchen, blah blah blah. I think at some point I forgot if she gets married or not. But if she does, then you also have to help her unpack like not just her stuff, but also someone else's stuff and seeing where you want to place all of these. So technically, when you play this game, you are taking on the role of the narrative designer and telling a story. Because, for example, if you decide to give her the consoles being closer to her hand than than the books she's reading, then this is gonna change the way that she is presented to you in your head. All right? Um, so yeah, the narrative designer is responsible of the world to make sense or the world setting, like the setting, but then there's an art direction, etc. That all participate in making the world make sense. But of course, the narrative sets up the setting first. Um, okay, I would say that the narrative designer's responsibility is making the world make sense. That's the best way to put it, yes. And then they will see whether this can be done or not accordingly. So yeah, awesome. Cool. Yes, and Jenna said that narrative should reinforce game design. Yes, absolutely. Everything should reinforce game design. The entire point of a game is for you to have fun. And if there is something that adds to it, please feel free to use it. If something subtracts from it, remove it immediately. All right? Awesome. Type. So whenever you're doing narrative design, some of the questions you should ask yourself is if you're writing a story, how can this story be interactive? How can our players influence the story? What kind of story are you building with the mechanics that you have at hand? And what will the player experience given the way that the story and the game design and the narrative design are building on each other? So what does this all mean? The game that I'm working on at the moment is called A Heavy Morning. A Heavy Morning is a game about a woman dealing with depression, and you need to help her get out of bed and leave the house. That's the basic premise of the game. It is a 45-minute point and click narrative experience, and it is all done, it's all hand drawn to a certain extent, unless you enter a certain area where it becomes a bit more wacky. All right? So what we wanted to do in terms of creating an interactive story is we wanted you to be able to check out some things around her house to see what kind of things, what kind of notes she leaves for herself, what kind of things make her feel better or feel worse, how exactly you were able to see the kind of area that she lives in and why she lives in the way, like why she lives the way she does. You know, you're gonna see that there are some items that she has that are a bit like run down because that's just, you know, she's not really taking good care of herself or her stuff. You're gonna see different places where she's just gonna have trouble leaving the bed, for example, and you can actually see that on her Instagram. You can see the way she like tries to pull herself up, but it hurts. So all of this kind of like storytelling happens not through actual words, but through the visual arts that you can see. All right. So yeah, so that's basically some of the things that you can think about. On the other hand, in a game like Hollow Knight, you generally don't need a story in any way, shape, or form because the enemies that you fight and the world that you experience tells a story in and of itself. So in Hollow Knight, for those that don't know, you play as a little bug and you fight other bugs that are affected by an infection. And basically, when you just beat them up, uh, it's you know you're able to progress forward, and as time goes on you get more and more power-ups, etc., etc., and things happen and it's pretty cool. All right. So in Hollow Knight, if you decide not to read anything or talk to anyone, you can still experience what the game is trying to show you in terms of narrative design. So if you go into Green Path, for example, it's called Green Path, and surprise, surprise, it is a green path. You're going to see a lot of enemies that live there that are, you know, covered in leaves, for example. Whereas if you decide to go to, I don't know, another area, Crystal Peak, for example, it's all covered in crystals. It goes for more purple colors. It's got creatures and music that just live there in a way that feels extremely, extremely natural. But in order to get to that point, you will need to build an entire world around what it is you are trying to represent and present in its own way. All right? Great. I love how many of you have actually played Hollow Knight with the things that you are sharing. So Milo's asking, so can you have narrative design without a story? That is a very interesting question. So you sometimes will let the player decide a story themselves. All right. You technically can. So for example, if I am playing a game like I don't know, League of Legends, let's say. Okay, League of Legends is a MOBA game. It's a massively online battle arena, I think, or multiplayer online. I'm not sure. But basically, it's a 5v5 where you go in with your team and you start beating other people up. All of these characters come from the same universe. All right, all the enemies that you see, all the minions, the dragons, whatever, blah blah blah, all of this stuff is from that world. And generally, whenever you're playing the game, they sometimes say little lines and little quips. These don't technically tell you a story, but while you see how they interact with others, that's when you start building your own story. And even if we take this out and set up the game in a way where every character is like this gray little ball, it still will help. It will still create a narrative, like simply a narrative. And the way this happens is by people telling you how the game went. So if I am playing a game and you're playing the game and we have the exact same characters and we're both playing against the same kind of team, the way that I will interact with them is different than the way they will interact with me or with you. And so you're going to have a new story that will come out from this. All right? So Riot technically did not create any specific story. What they did is they gave us a playground and we started creating stories. What they did in terms of narrative was make sure that the map itself looks cohesive, the characters look like they belong in the world, and they gave them each a different motivation that can be heard whenever you play the game. So, yeah, I hope this makes sense. All right. So as a narrative designer, what you're mostly going to do is you're gonna set up the stuff between a writer's perspective and a game designer's perspective. You're gonna organize and integrate the story. You're gonna make sure that you will communicate with everyone so that the story actually makes sense, so that the art aligns with it, so that the game design itself makes sense as well. So that the mechanics of the game align with whatever everyone else is doing, etc., etc. All right. A lot of people sometimes mess like it's not mess up, but sometimes they spend way too much time instead of actually working on design, or sorry, narrative design. They end up just writing. All right. If you decide to write a lot, it doesn't mean anything because people might not end up reading it. What actually matters is for you to give yourself the time and the space um, to make sure that whatever documents you do end up sharing make sense for anyone involved, basically. So what does this mean? If the narrative designer wants to write something that the programmer can read or understand, they don't need to know exactly where this person came from or the universe that they built or blah 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 blah. They just need to know that character can jump, character can hit, and character can die, for example. All right? So yeah, so that's basically the most important thing I would say you would have to do as a narrative designer. Yeah, there are also other things that you will do. So you're going to do world building, you're going to write characters, you're going to write cinematic scenes, different items, etc., etc. Like there are a lot of tasks for a narrative designer to get through, and they're generally really, really fun. So Wafa's asking if she can create a visual novel. Yes, you can. Jana's asking, how do you know as a dev when a story is explaining too much instead of letting the player discover things? And any tips on making sure one doesn't lose the balance? Okay, it depends on the kind of game you are making. Generally, you want to show and not tell as much as possible because people will spend more time playing than they will spend listening. The number of times I've seen people just go like next, 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 next is a lot because no one wants to read words. They want to actually go through the action. So the less words you have and the more you can show in the level that you are building, the better. Okay? Tips to make sure one doesn't lose balance. Always ask yourself, can this line of text that I wrote instead be a small item? Can it be something that um, I am seeing instead, something that I'm experiencing? These are all questions you should ask yourself in one way or another. And then the players that are interested may end up going to your wiki page. They may end up asking questions. They may end up creating their own theories. And from that, your story will reward them some more. But again, don't forget you are building a game that is going to be fun. All right? How many of us have played Assassin's Creed for the story? And how many of us have played it because parkour? You know? These are things that you have to think about as well. All right. So, other things. There are a few other ways to actually look into games and the way that their narratives are designed. Um, Generally, for example, when we look at Zagreus from Hades, the way that his character was designed is something that is extremely, extremely relevant for the narrative plot. All right? If Zagreus did not look the way he does, then he will have had a completely different personality. You know, he's got the spiky hair, he's got the cool clothes, the red colors, the big flashes of, you know, this color. You've got the bones on him, you've got the kind of weapons he uses. All of this stuff builds into a very convincing character. If you've ever seen him talk, he's very like, you know, confident, he's very proud, he's very edgy. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Adrian. And he's cool. He's just a really cool dude, you know? When you look at his dad, for example, you're gonna see like a big, bulky man who expects you to just agree to anything he says. And this is all super important in the way that these characters are designed. All right? Um, so whenever you are creating a game, the narrative doesn't only rely on the I don't want to say the story, but yeah, it doesn't just rely on the actual stuff that you say. It also relies on the ways that your characters interacts with the world and the way that the world interacts with itself. All right. On the other hand, on the other side, we've got a picture from Fallout, and generally, Fallout does something right, which is if you check the first sentence, it literally says, I'm ready to continue on the last chapter. So this is basically telling you, hey, I want to skip all the dialogue and I just want to start doing the mission. All right. However, if you want to try and go for something more, to know more about the mission, to know more about the world, because you're just very immersed, you can check the other, what's it called? The other options because all of these options will give you more story if you want it. All right? We're not like stuffing a story down someone's throat. We're giving them the option to try it. And if they don't want to, totally fine, go blow up some things. So Kane's asking, what if my game is story based? What exactly should I do in that case? So in a case like this, um, you will have to like your main mechanic, your core mechanic is basically just pointing and clicking. All right. Um, yes, you will want to say things to actually move the plot forward, but sometimes instead of actually writing something, whenever you can just show instead of tell, that is always going to be more fun and more exciting for the player. So, for example, let's say instead of saying, "Oh no, someone was murdered here," you could show a body or like the outline of a body and a bunch of blood on the floor and like a bunch of bullet casings, you know? So in a case like that, you're not saying that someone died, you're showing that someone died. All right? If you want to say that this is like in the example of a murder mystery, for example. In the case of a I don't know, choices matter kind of game, once again, what you're gonna be looking at is not the you're gonna be looking at the world as a whole and you're gonna let people interact with it in their own way. All right? Does this kind of answer your question? I guess to summarize it in one line, which is very important. Your story-based game needs to make sense for the player when they are looking at everything as a whole. And the more things you can not say and show instead, you should. To move the story forward, yes, you are going to need lines. Yes, you're going to need story. Yes, you're going to need words. Yes, you're going to need like stuff on the screen. But make sure that this is as equally important to you as the visuals that you will represent inside the game. Um, so I think Ace Attorney, for example, what they do is, they just have the music. They like smack the table and point. They scream. They get frustrated. They get happy. All of these things actually build towards that. Safir said that Disco Elysium is very story heavy, but mechanics also make a lot of sense. Yes, absolutely, because this is the way that they have built the game. Um, I have a question, but the answer will be lengthy, so I'll save it till the end. Amran, if you'd like, write it down and I'll answer it as soon as I can. Adrian's saying Life is Strange and Florence are two story-based games with very different and cool mechanics, and their mechanics itself are fun on their own. Yes, absolutely. Florence was actually a very, very interesting game. It's part of what inspired some of the things inside the game we're making as well. Happy morning. Ideally, especially for small games, should we create the idea of the core mechanics first and then build the narrative around it? Rashid, yes, absolutely. You should always do that. Because again, as I mentioned before, if the game itself is not fun, no one is going to look at your story. All right? Um, Mario did not need to be a plumber. Mario did not need to be jumping inside a grass world or a castle. Mario did not need to jump on mushrooms. Mario did not need to fight a giant turtle. But all of these things were just added so that the game can be a bit more fluffed, so it can be a bit more fun. The original Legend of Zelda, for example, they created Link as a character, as a name, and the idea of what he wanted to do very close to the end of development. So they created the entire mechanics, they created the way that you would play things, the puzzles, etc., etc. And after they did all of this, did they give him a name? So yes, it's very important that you first build the core and then the narrative around it. All right? Uh, all right. Some quick other tips about narrative design. It's very important to know whether how big your team is, what kind of ideas you're creating. For example, if you want to make a fan game of Batman, for example, you're going to need to know about whether you can publish this in the first place, or whether it's considered like fan art, or whether you can make money from it if you do want to sell it, for example. Um, Whenever you create, again, when it comes to narrative design, you have to think about how it ties to the core, and I will keep saying this over and over and over and over, because it's super important to know this. Um, if you are making a game like, I don't know if you guys have seen Slime Rancher, but you basically take care of slimes, and they're all like these round, fluffy, cute things. All right? The narrative designer in the game made sure that the story that is you're being sold, quote unquote, is actually something that aligns with like the soft, happy version of slimes, or like the soft, happy look and feel of bright colors, you know? Um, the sounds, for example, that they use whenever like you basically collect slimes with like a, it's not a gun, it's like a Hoover of sorts, I guess. And like you suck them in, and as you do, like you get like the ploop 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 sounds, and it's very cute. And this is, for example, a way that they've tied the narrative design of sound with the main mechanic, which is collection. All right. How do you make the player feel like the most important person in the room is always super, super important. It's why a lot of people sometimes, like a lot of games are like, Sire, please help us. We have rats in the basement and we have no idea how to take care of them. Please, we'll give you anything if you take care of the rats. And then you go inside and you find out that the rats are actually a nest of bandits or something. I don't know. In a case like this, when you're done, they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. We could not have created this stew with 8 cabbages without you collecting all the cabbages from all over the world, or whatever." So it's very important that whenever you actually create a game, the narrative, the main character, which is who you're playing, is aligned in terms of motivation, expectation, and excitement with the tasks at hand. All right? Finally, when it comes to narrative design, it's very important to know what kind of story you are trying to tell and what kind of um, thing you want the player to leave with. All right, what kind of story you want the player to leave with? What kind of um, I don't want to say ideas, but like, what's the conclusion from your game? All right, the conclusion can be nothing. Tetris, for example, does not have a conclusion. But people started naming the different four pieces, and they just have, their favorites and everything. So even though there's no story there, people have still built a sort of design around it in one way or another. All right. We're gonna have a workshop right now. It's very quick, but before we do that, I'm just gonna read Omran's question, and then we will hop into the workshop. And this is going to take us like 5 minutes, I think. I don't want to give it more than that because there are a few more things I would like to tell you guys. All right, so Amran's asking, he said, I do have a question that I've always wondered about in game design. Some parts of the game are made to be unfun or tedious on purpose, like grinding for a weapon or going back and forth between areas. If bad game design, since it's not fun, why is it constantly in most games, are said to be perfect by players or even big titles? Is there some sort of purpose for wasting time? All right, so, this is actually another talk that I usually give, and it's about the levels of excitement that you are going to build for a player and what kind of things they expect. You're right, this is a very long sentence, a long question, but I'll try to summarize it. Generally, whenever you are making a game, your version of fun might be very different from someone else's version of fun. I could not, for example, get into The Witcher. I could not get into Terraria. I absolutely loved playing Hollow Knight and Binding of Isaac, and on the other hand, I loved playing Stardew Valley and what's it called? Animal Crossing. So these are all very, very different games. In Animal Crossing, the grind is the game. You're just destroying one block at a time in order to just rebuild the same thing up in your own way. In a game like Binding of Isaac, you're basically just trying to collect items and you're trying to like, there's no nonsense in there, for example. All right. So depending on the kind of game you are building and depending on the kind of person you are, sometimes the grind is exactly what you want and it's exactly what you need. I saw this video at some point of someone playing Tears of the Kingdom, Legend of Zelda, and there was a very simple puzzle that was barely a puzzle even, where you just have to bring like giant metal balls from like the top of like an area and then put them all in the bottom of the area. So you can pick them up one by one and put them there. But someone else decided to build like a small tractor, and then when they turned on the tractor, all the balls were pushed forward and then they just fell into the hole, as expected. So basically, they were able to turn a silly challenge into something very fun for them because they got to build a truck. So that was the way that they decided to do it. So you might not have been the target audience for some things, but also at the same time, the grind will increase the time, the playtime of the game. The grind will increase the feeling of reward as well to actually finishing the thing. And it's just something that will exist to a certain extent as friction, because also too much happiness at the same time will cause you to fatigue. So sometimes it's good to give you a slower pace. All right? So it's not necessarily to keep people playing the game, but it could be. It's also to give people some time off from doing something insane or extreme, which is why sometimes it takes you a while to just walk from one place to another. And it is to make you feel like it's worth it. Yes, well done. Awesome. I hope this answers your question, Amran. Um, all right, cool. طيب. Yes, exactly. Adrian said something very important as well. Excessive fun makes the player numb to it. So you lose a lot of the wow moments. Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So, you guys have 5 minutes, all right, maximum. As soon as we hit four people describing the thing that we have on the screen, we will stop. All right. So I want you guys to describe a game in one sentence with no more than one sentence. All right. And I want you to see if you can summarize it and how efficiently you can do that. All right. So, for example, someone said mutated sweetheart carries two swords, one for humans and one for monsters, while also being accompanied by too many women. Um, who is that? Do you guys know which game this is? Same with the second one. Yes, well done, Elias. It is The Witcher. What about the second one, which is a brave young man goes on an adventure to save the love of his life from a green villain. On his way, he travels across different worlds and fights an army of the villain while making new friends to help him along the quest. Nope, it's not Zelda. Mario. Well done, Mino. Yeah, exactly, 100%. All right. So I want you guys to describe a few games that you like this way. Um, I'll give you guys like 2 minutes. Uh, choose a game, describe it in one sentence, and then we will read it aloud, and then we'll see how many people actually guess the game. All right? I'm going to pause the recording if possible, and we will continue in a few seconds. So we are back. This took way less time than I expected. So the first one we're gonna grab is a person inherits a farm and moves to the countryside hoping for a quiet life and somehow becomes responsible for the entire town's economy. How many of you guessed this game? All right, wonderful. Yes, it is Stardew Valley. There are a few things I would do to update this description, but given how quickly you were able to get it, that was great. A guy needs to collect rings with his friends and defeat an evil doctor to keep some emeralds safe. All right, this is from Sarah. Sonic. Yep, Sonic the Hedgehog. Fantastic. All right, I'm gonna grab one more. Let's see. The Prince of Hell fights his way through hell, okay, trying to escape and give the rest of his family help him by giving him superpowers to help him escape. And we already have an answer to this one. It is Hades. Fantastic. A game where you climb up a mountain with up to three other friends. All right, Peak. Yes, absolutely. Families' generation built on fighting and hating their offsprings as their daily routine while destroying ecosystems along the way. I'm not sure I know this one. Which one is that, Sapphire? Is it correct? Is it Tekken? Awesome. Cool. Perfect. طيب. So you guys, to a certain extent, have got the idea. Generally, whatever you guys want to do with a one-liner is you want to hook the player, you want to get them interested in the story, you want to get their imagination going, and most importantly, you want to get the people that don't care about your game out as soon as possible. All right? One of the worst things you can do is get someone interested in a game genre they don't care about. Because what you will get is bad reviews. All right? You're gonna get people bored. And you really want to avoid that. Okay? If I am going to make a first-person shooter game, I am not going to advertise it to Stardew Valley players. I'm going to advertise it to Call of Duty players. If I'm going to make a farming sim, I'm not going to advertise it to hack and slash players. I'm going to advertise it to farming sim players. All right. So a one-liner is generally whenever you look at a big scene, like a screenshot of a game, and you try to describe it as neatly as possible to make sure that you get all the players that would like the game to love it, and anyone that would hate the game to absolutely run away from it as quickly as possible. All right. Another importance of one-liners, as we mentioned, is understanding people's reaction to your idea. So if you see that if you're telling someone that you're about your game and they're like, okay, I guess, and that's just very common, then either you need to change your one-liner or you need to change your game. All right. Um, So yeah, so this is basically the importance of one-liners. Whenever I want to build a one-liner to describe the games that I make, is I try to include the following things. I would include the genre. I would include uh, a bit of not the story, but kind of like the action that the player needs to take. I would include information about what the world kind of looks like to a certain extent. And I guess these are like the main things that I would go for. So, for example, if I wanted to describe, again, let's say Mario, the original one, I would say, I would also go something along the lines of uh, jump and fight your way across different planets or countrysides, I guess, to save the princess that has been taken by an evil guy or something of the sort. All right, so I give people an idea that they have to jump. I'll tell them that they have different levels. I told them that they will need to attack, and I gave them the purpose, which is saving the princess. All right. So this is the importance of one-liners, and when you guys are creating your games and your game ideas, it's very good to summarize everything this way. All right, perfect. So I also added a few extra slides regarding some things that you will be going through in terms of building your own games. One of them is world building. Whenever you guys are building your worlds, it's important to know what kind of world you are building. And this is going to open a huge can of worms, to be honest, but it's fine. You've got two different kinds of worlds that you can build. The first one is the macro type of world, which basically focuses on everything and then puts you inside of it. So, for example, a game like Skyrim is a game that is a macro game because you can choose different characters, you can choose different, like you can be an elf, you can be a Nord, you can be Khajiit, you can be like so many different things. And you can also be an archer, you can be a heavy weaponry user, you can be a wizard, you can be a magician, you can be a werewolf, you can be whatever. For the game is not tailored to your character. The game is tailored to being a sandbox that you can just do anything you want in it. All right? Whereas a micro game is one where it builds the character and then the entire game is built around them. So for example, when you're playing a game like Celeste, what you're gonna do is you're going to run around, grab onto different places, and then either hike up or down, or basically just solve different puzzles and try to platform as efficiently as possible. If you look at the game design in Celeste, you can almost easily see the character. You can see which areas you can stand on. You can know exactly what's in the background. And most importantly, it's very clear where and when you can jump. And most, like, one of the cool things about the game is when you mess up, you know that it's 100% your fault. And it's basically because of the way that the game mechanics are built and because of the way that the game looks and the visual feedback you get. This helps make the game like look and feel extremely good. So, for example, if you brought in a Dark Souls or Elden Ring character to come into the world of Celeste, they would not get far at all because they do not have the skills needed to actually win the game. Whereas if you put them in Skyrim, totally fine. They're just gonna big bonk everyone and they're gonna be good to go. All right. But then again, as you look at Elden Ring or Skyrim or just the FromSoft games generally, um, you can place them inside of Skyrim because they exist in the same kind of macro world where anything can happen and you can do anything into it. Also, I have no idea if I'm speaking too fast. Let me know if this isn't a problem, by the way. I know we're like an hour in, but like still. All right. So whenever you guys are building your games, to know whether you want to build a macro world or a micro world, ask yourself what kind of fighting does the game have? Is it a first-person shooter? Is it a hack and slash? Is it just a beat 'em up? Or does it not have any of that, kind of like Stardew Valley, as we mentioned before? Um, what's the story that you want your game to tell? Is there a story? Tetris, as we've mentioned before, does not need to have a story. The story is the game that you play along the way. FIFA, same thing. Most multiplayer games that are like PvP, they don't necessarily have a story, but they just give you an idea about the things to do. I don't know if any of you have played Marvel Rivals, for example, but generally, whenever you're loading into a level so that you can beat someone else up, they actually tell you that you are protecting something or you are fighting against something or whatever. But you generally don't read into it because you don't care. You just want to go in and play as a certain character. Um, so yeah, other questions, for example, is did a major event change the world? What kind of freedom do players have when picking their character? All of these are important because they will give you an idea about what kind of world you want to build and what you expect to happen inside the upcoming stuff. All right? Um, I hope this kind of made sense. I don't know if my last sentence did. Um, but yeah. So to summarize world building, choose the kind of character you want to live in your world, and also choose whether you want to build a world around the character or a character around the world. All right? Cool. Halla, well, we talked about characters for a bit, but what exactly is a character and what is a player? You, as a person, as a human being, are the player. The character is the one that you control. All right? Generally, whenever you are controlling this character, you want to make sure that whatever you want your character to do and whatever you want the player to do align perfectly. All right, one of the more recent games I've been playing is Dead as Disco. And in Dead as Disco, you disco too hard and you sold your soul to the devil or something of the sort. And now what you're trying to do is to get it back. So this perfectly aligns with you wanting to beat up enemies and what's it called? You wanting to beat up enemies and your character wanting to do the same. All right. In a game like Stardew Valley, part of the reason I didn't enjoy it at the beginning is because I tried to play it like I was missing out on time, like I wasn't doing anything efficiently, blah, blah, blah. And then I remembered that my character just moved to a farm because of how stressed he was with his main job. So I decided to start taking it slow. Yes, exactly, Etienne. Anxiety Valley versus Stardew Valley. Exactly. So once I started letting go and realizing, oh, I don't really need to stress out, and I don't need to min max, I started enjoying the game much, much, much more. All right. Um, so yeah, so it's very important whenever you're building your character for it to align with whatever you want the player to do. Um, yeah, hope that makes sense. I think it does though, so that's cool. All right. What other kind of characters do we have? We have NPCs. All right. NPCs are always going to help you push your story forward. All right. They are non-playable characters, so the entire point of them, when they are controlled by, the computer instead of another person, is that they will help move your character's story forward. All right. As we mentioned before, the entire point of this is for them to help you feel like you are the center of the universe. But at the same time, you don't want to always make someone grind. So it's not always about going and gathering items. It's not always about having an NPC that can't move and take care of themselves while you have to escort them. Sometimes it's just about funny characters that just say something or do something specific that just make you laugh. So anyone that's played Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, for example, will kind of get what I'm talking about with NPCs that are fun. They also have a new game called Turn the Boy Robs a Bank. Both of them are very, very funny. Highly recommended. Um, like Pokemon NPCs, yeah, Pokemon NPCs just generally stand in your way to a certain extent. But when you meet them and start hanging out, like when you meet them, you'll kind of get an idea about why they are in the area that they are in, basically. Bradley did not make me feel. like the center of the universe. I have not played Birdly, so I'm not sure to be honest. Um, yeah. Oh, even for example, in Elden Ring. From Deltarune. Okay, okay, fair, valid. Um, Even in Elden Ring, like as soon as you meet the first like NPC, he tells you, "Oh, you're maidenless," and you're like, "Excuse you, like what's wrong with you?" You know, but like he gives you an idea about what kind of thing you need to do to move forward. So yes, it makes you irked, but it also pushes you in the direction that the game wants you to push in, which is why it works. All right. Um, awesome. Again, we've mentioned this before, but we will mention it again as well. The player wants to be called awesome. The player wants to be amazing. The player wants to be the coolest person around. All right? And in order to do this, you need to make sure that you give the player what they want. Sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to make everything easy. It just means you have to reward the player for something cool that they have done. Um, and that's the most important thing, basically. All right? When playing games, you are the one that is doing the stuff. Okay? If you're watching a movie and you see someone lose, you're gonna be like, "Oh, that sucks for him." But when you get hit inside the game and you lose, it's 100% your fault, and no one else can change that. All right? Um, so it's also very important to make stories that make sense. If you are going to put a story, it doesn't make sense not to have something that is correct or accurate or clear. Okay? Don't put a story if you don't want to. And basically, what I'm saying is don't just like half bake it. You know, make a full, cool, fun story. All right? It's also super important to find the right balance between telling the player where to go and letting the player do what they want. So a lot of people, for example, complain about the two things actually. The first one is, hey, listen, what's it called? That little the fairy from Zelda, Navi. Yes, thank you so much. Um, because she was just very, very, very annoying. Another game that people were bothered by was God of War, because even though you wanted to try to solve the puzzles, sometimes someone was like, "Hey, look, a lever, it's over here. I wonder what happens if we pull it." And you're just like, you know, I wanted to figure that out. I'm not even looking over there right now. I'm looking for, I don't know, radishes or whatever. Um, so yeah. Um, so yeah, and it's also super, super, super important to thank the player whenever they do something. All right. Even if you think it's over the top, sometimes it's worth it. So that's something to mention as well. All right. Final thing I want to say, I think there might be more actually. Yes, okay. So whenever you guys are creating your protagonists as well, so again, characters, remember that they are the way that people are going to get into your game. So it's very important that you present them the way you want people to see them. Do you guys remember when Poe landed like from the sky in what's it called? Yeah. Uh, guys, help me. The movie with Poe the panda. What's it called? Oh, thanks, guys. Appreciated. One, two, three, four, five, six people were like Kung Fu Panda. It's literally the movie about the panda doing Kung Fu. Okay. So the way that he falls from the sky and gets chosen is a pretty cool entrance for a character. All right. So it's very important that when you introduce your character, it makes sense that this is what they look like, this is what they do, and you have to be very, very, very clear about that character. There's a game where you die, but you sign a deal with the devil or like with death or something, where he will let you go back to Earth with the condition that for the next 24 hours, everything you do is manual. So you have to move this character's arms and their legs and their fingers or whatever, and you have to remember to breathe every now and then, or else you will die. Yes, Manuel Samuel, exactly, exactly. So in a game like this, the character is a he's kind of a loser, but that's part of the point of it. So it makes sense for you to have him this way. All right? So yeah, after choosing the kind of character you want to build, you have to create the rest of the story so that it actually enhances this character's personality or the way that they present themselves, etc., etc. If you've decided to put a character in a different world or a different universe or whatever, um, you can find legitimate excuses for why they don't know anything. One of the games that I remember did it well was Ezio's third game from Assassin's Creed. It was not Brotherhood. It was yeah. Um, what was Revelations? Yes, thank you so much. So in Revelations, they give you like a new what's it called? They give you a new hidden blade that you can use in different ways. And the way they introduce it is by telling you that, oh yeah, the assassins of this land have actually created something interesting and different. And so, because of that, let's teach you how to use them. And then they actually teach you and give you a tutorial. So it's pretty cool from that case. A lot of games use amnesia. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, make sure that it makes sense for you to use them. And then if the character is an outsider, also explain why they're there. In Undertale, for example, you fall through a hole and suddenly you're in the land of monsters. I don't know, in what's it called? I'm starting to forget names of games. I'm growing old, you guys. In Metroid, for example, you play as Samus, who's basically a bounty hunter to a certain extent, who just goes around different planets and finds different things and does different stuff. And a lot of times, her stuff gets destroyed, so she has to go and rebuild them from the planet itself. So this is a different way for them to do it. If you guys have suggestions as well on how to write characters, please feel free to also add them in the comments. Other things to add as well. Generally, whenever you guys want to write cool or better introductions for characters or for the game itself, some things that you can look at as well is allowing NPCs to also share their different ideas. So a lot of times you've got, for example, in Pokemon, there's Red, your rival. He exists because he's a rival. So it's an interesting twist, I guess, on just being you yourself. Now you have someone that's an equal to you that is also going up in their own way. All right. Sometimes having a flashback is also very interesting because it makes you care about the character more. It's also a very good excuse to set up a tutorial. What's it called? The Witcher does that pretty well, for example. And sometimes one of the things you can do is make the player OP so that there is practically no way for them to die in the first battle, and then suddenly take everything from them and have them rebuild towards that because now they suddenly have a goal they want to build towards. So Ahmad's asking, can writing characters in games be the same way as writing characters in D&D? Mm, okay. So in a case like this, it depends on the kind of game you are making. Generally, having this information about a character is amazing. However, it does not mean that this is something that everyone will read. It's a good way for you to actually explore and express what you want from the character. But it doesn't mean everything needs to actually get into the book. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I want you guys to type out a character that is from Amazon. How would you describe this character? What do they look like? What are they wearing? Um, anything of the sort. Just give me a quick, brief introduction. I'll wait for you guys to write it as well. Yes. So generally, I would call them Amazonians. Okay. So when I said from Amazon, Ahmad was like Jeff Bezos. And when I said Amazonian, suddenly everyone had probably different ideas in their head. And that's because just saying one word is not going to be enough to actually describe what it is I am thinking of. All right. So it's very important to actually describe everything, but don't expect all of it to make the cut into the game. This is what wikis are for. This is what um this is what the fan pages are for. This is what developer interviews are for. All right. And it's totally fine that not everything actually makes it into the game as well. This is totally fine. Amran said that another idea I see a lot is the main protagonist seeing what they could do on TV or something, or in something real time before they start their journey as an introduction. Yes, absolutely. And this is part of where the player OP and then take everything away from them works basically. All right. Cool. Final thing about characters, I think. Yes. Final thing about characters is whenever you are building a character, one of the ways to do it, there are a lot of different ways of building characters. D&D is definitely a very good way to do so. But for example, what you can do is you can pick a general role for them, give them a main trait, and then describe them, describe what they're like. After that, you can start going for any sort of pseudoscience to create the character's personality. You can look into the MBTI types, which is basically whether they're extroverted or introverted, the way they think, the way they interact with others, etc., etc. You can even like go for like tarot cards, pick a few random ones, and then accordingly decide on their future, their past, blah blah blah. You can look into astrology, pick a random day and date, and then see what kind of character they describe for someone that is born during that day. So by grabbing all of these different things, you are able to create a character and take inspiration from things that are outside of what you think. I know one of the things I struggled for before kind of like following these tasks is I always used to create characters that were always um, what's it called? Lawful good. So they were just characters that made sense. They were characters that were very like justice oriented, and I never ended up creating something that was bad or something that was chaotic. So, in order to change that, I started having to add external randomness to the characters that I was creating. All right. So yeah, after you create like certain like a certain personality trait, you give them their governing trait, which is what they are most interested in doing. And then finally, one of the cool things that is kind of tough and not always needed at all is basically to select a conflicting trait to whatever they already have inside of them. And accordingly decide to build whatever it is you want to build in the character. So for example, oh, fantastic. So Adrian says that for my characters, I always tried to exaggerate people I knew. That way, it was easier to write their dialogues. 100%. This is actually a very, very good way of doing it. Because suddenly you have someone that is already a basis, and you look at them and you're like, okay, what would that person do in this scenario? And it's very important not only to look at the people you like, you also look at the people you dislike, and you're like, oh my God, I hate this person. Why do I hate him? I'm gonna write it down. Da, 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 da. And then after you write this person down, you're like, oh my God, okay, I can see why I find him so annoying. Let me add so and so traits and make him stinky. I don't know. And accordingly decide which kind of like character role you want to put him in. Um, so yeah, I guess with that, I am done talking about the introduction to narrative design. I hope you guys had a bit of fun. I know I spoke a lot. I know I spoke really quickly as well. Um, Generally speaking, whenever you guys want to create something for your stories, whenever you want to create something for your games as a whole, um, the most important thing to do is make sure that it aligns with whatever game design you have set up. Make sure that it aligns with the kind of actions that players are going to take. And from there, you're going to be good to go. All right. So if anyone has any questions, the floor is open for you guys. You can also follow me on anything and everything. Generally, I am on whatever, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, all of the jazz. And yeah, and whenever you guys have other questions, come in, feel free to let me know. You can either put them in Discord. Yes, Malo, go ahead. You can either put the questions in Discord and I'll answer them there if you are not around for this conversation. Or you can not ask anything if you don't have any questions. Yes, Arian, what's up?
Hello, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So first of all, thank you for your speech. It was amazing. Loved every single part of it.
Thank you so much.
I have two questions, like from very different perspectives. One is more for a like corporative like studio, and the
Okay.
other is for an indie one. So I'll start with the corporative one, because
Okay.
on this kind of roles, as I've always been on the indie world, I have this doubt of what does the how does a narrative designer workday look like?
Okay. We're talking in like a small studio or a big one?
A big one. Like he only does that.
Okay.
He or she
Okay.
doesn't.
So the narrative designer in this case would focus mostly, uh, not like basically the narrative designer would be the link to a certain extent between the artists, the game designers, the storytellers, the quest designers, the character designers, etc., etc. So their main goal, here I'm gonna go back a bit as well over here. Whoops. Let's go back. Yeah, it's over here. Okay, so the main focus of the narrative designer is not just tracking the story and the plot, which also again includes all the different quests that you can do, but also the way that the quests sound like, the way the characters will interact and act inside the game, the way that the missions flow, as they mentioned over here, which is basically the quests to a certain extent, and just generally the scope of the story to a certain extent, or the interactive story as a whole. So when they get into work, generally the focus is going to be on one or more of these things at some point. They're also the ones that are going to be cutting away some, mm, like let's say that, they suddenly have to like tone down the game or change something different in number of quests or whatever. They will also be the ones to take such decisions and be like, okay, these are the things that we can cut, these are the things that we must keep, etc., etc. Um, I hope this kind of answers your question to a certain extent.
Yes, perfectly, perfectly.
Cool. Awesome.
So
And second question?
yeah, the other one was this is more for an indie studio situation where like
Mm,
you're just like six or not many people.
mm,
And so when does narrative design come into play? Like you're designing everything, you have your maybe your core
mhm.
gameplay, and when do you start thinking about okay, narrative time?
Okay. Generally, if I were part of a small studio, the narrative design would not be one person. It would be, I'm gonna throw random numbers. It would be, for example, 60% game designer, 20% artist, 20% programmer, for example. The game designer is going to be taking the biggest um, chunk of narrative design because they are going to decide what the levels look like. They are going to decide what the characters look like. They're going to decide how the characters interact with each other. They're going to be balancing the game. They're going to be making sure that people act out or don't act in a certain way. The artists are then going to also add to this by giving their own opinion on what the characters should look like, how they should move, with the stretching and squashing of all of the different animation that they have, etc., etc. The programmer honestly doesn't even need to be there. It could be like 60% game designer, 40% artist to a certain extent. So the main focus of narrative design in this case would not be how do I like the main focus of narrative design in a small studio is to answer the questions of how can I make sure that the game's story aligns with my game's actions, and how is it that I can connect um, the fun of the game with whatever mission I want, or like not mission, whatever, um, not ideas. شنو خلاصة whatever conclusion I guess the game needs to have. So yeah, so a narrative designer would actually just be a game designer wearing a different hat or an artist wearing a different hat, and they would try their best to make the game as clear and as cohesive as possible for anyone that does end up playing it. So yeah,
Thank you so much.
I hope this answers your question. Awesome. Um, Great. If we have anyone else that also wants to open mic, feel free, just let me know, raise your hand, and we'll be good to go. Milo's asking, said, I do want to hear your opinion on the game and narrative design in Greece, if you have time, because I did play this game and you recommended it and it was beautiful, and I think it's not just the art. Yes. So Greece is actually an insanely beautiful game. Actually, the studio is in Spain, which is, I thought it was going to be French. Turns out it wasn't, so that was cool. Anyway, so in a game like Greece, they play a lot with colors, they play a lot with sound, and they play a lot with tempo. All right. So the game's tempo and the way it works changes depending on what part of the levels you are in. So the narrative design in this game is built around you actually moving forward in uh the I mean obviously you moving forward with the actions that you take. This is a bit spoilery, so for anyone that does not want to be spoiled, come back in exactly 1 minute. But generally, in a game like Greece, you have a part where at the beginning she loses her voice, everything loses color, everything starts cracking, everything falls. All right. Suddenly, when you start moving, you're gonna get an extreme burst of red. This extreme burst of red is actually just a sign of her anger to a certain extent, her rage. Um, and as you get through the game, you're gonna collect more mechanics, you're gonna do more things, and all of this is going to help you move forward. At some point, you're going to be doing a bit of platforming, but the platforming you do is very safe. The part which is not safe is when the bird attacks you or when the turtle comes and saves you. And both of these moments are extremely, extremely well timed because they are what will help push you forward and help you, um, um, what's the word? Um, help you get to the conclusion that is needed. But the music plus the art plus the path that you take plus the experience you gain from playing the different puzzles and the levels all built together into a beautifully designed narrative. So, um, yes, game good, narrative design great, highly recommended, especially if you are feeling a bit conflicted, just generally. So yeah, I hope this answers your questions, Malo. All right. If it doesn't, also let me know. Zafir, can we hop to you?
Yes, this is my first. I don't know if you're supposed to. I don't know if I'm supposed to be asking you, but this is my first session that I watch,
Okay.
and I'm trying to get filled in on the team building.
Okay.
بس لأنه I want to be the team leader.
Okay.
Uh,
So for team building stuff, we can talk about this actually on Discord. Ahmad can help you out with this as well. Welcome to the sessions as well. Good to see you. Faiza, you have anything specific? Let's move it to Discord and we can discuss it over there if that's okay with you. Sounds good?
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. All right, we have one more question from Ahmad, and I think that would be that. For a combat-driven dialogue roguelike game, that's a lot of words. What is a way that I could infuse the narrative into it without intrusive cutscenes or dialogue slides? It's something I'm struggling with in my project, and I don't think I want to make it take too much of the gameplay, but I understand that narrative can add a lot of depth. Something like Hollow Knight did it so well, but of course the story in it is so faded that without doing some research, you can't fully grasp anything. Absolutely. So, Hades once again does this very well. What the game does is, for example, when you're fighting against, I think it was Thanatos. Um, Awalshi, they do have like a bit of a cut. That's true. But when you win, he does say a few sentences like "I win" or "haha" or "this is like my turn" or whatever. So these small lines are very, very important. When you get hit, these are also things that like the way that he replies to getting hit, or for example, when he meets the boss or the bosses and just talks to the Hydra, for example, or talks to his father or whatever. I mean, not his father. I don't know if you've played the game or not, but like whatever. Don't worry about it. Um, the way that all of this works is, I mean, voice acting helps a lot, obviously. But if it wasn't for voice acting, again, you do not need words itself to describe narrative. Um, so, for example, you can tell a lot about the world of Slay the Spire by looking at the kind of items that they are selling, or the designs of the characters themselves, or the cards as well that you're going to be playing with. Um, so yeah, these are all super, super important things to keep in mind. Another game that does dialogue or narrative very well. Um, so what I would suggest when it comes to narrative is give people choice. All right, if someone wants to read and check in on things, let them decide that they can click on it. Because a roguelike, once you start doing really well in a roguelike, You stop caring about what you're looking at in terms of art, and you start only caring about what you're looking at in terms of mechanics. So, um, build things, obviously, build things unintrusively is like it's a dumb thing to say, but generally, for example, put item descriptions on the sides. You don't need to tell me what exactly is happening in the game, but for example, in loading scenes, that's a good place to put it. You suggested it yourself. Um, you don't need to have a lot of narrative once again until you finish the game or when you start. And in the middle, just let people have fun. This is totally acceptable. It's totally, totally, totally acceptable. All right. Um, Again, I don't know if this answers your question. If there's anything else you want to talk about, you can also open the microphone. Awesome. Cool. Perfect. طيب. So I guess final thing just to summarize all of this. As a narrative designer, you're going to be making sure the game is fun, cohesive, and enjoyable for anyone that checks it out. It's okay not to have a story. It's important instead to have the world be as attached as possible, not just to itself, but also to the characters around it. Um, Highly recommended that you just hop in, make something fun, and then try to flavor it with extra words if needed. And if you don't need that, that's totally fine. Yeah, I think that is the last piece of advice I'll give you guys. Thank you so much for attending. Once again, this is going to be here just for the recording on YouTube. If you guys have any questions later on, feel free to let me know. And if not, that is totally, totally fine. And take care, and we'll see you guys soon.